Actually, the biggest, this was one of my favorite things that I learned in yeshiva, and I wasn't even in class. I had a roommate who's still one of my close friends, but when he first got there, I didn't understand him at all. This was a guy who he would roll out of bed in the morning and daven shacharis in his Batman pajama pants. Okay, now I'm not whatever you guys want to daven in, right? You go at your own pace. Yeah, go at your own pace. But I felt like, and I wasn't. It's not like I was. Wearing a suit and tie to shacharis, but I felt like, come on, man, be a mensch, daven, looking well dressed. And I couldn't understand how somebody could be so lacking in self-awareness that he was dressed in such a way that was so inappropriate. And then after a few months, I started to realize. One day he walked into our room and he's like, Moshe, come, we gotta go. I was like, go where? He's like, come on, the family down the street, they're moving. We got to go help them move. I was like, I'm busy. I value my time. I need to. And I realized that this was a guy who was so focused on the needs of other people, he was not even thinking about how he dressed. And I thought, I totally missed it. Here I was, criticizing him because I'm very inward focused. And I think about how do I look and how do I, am I dressed the right way? And what I realized is different people are very different. And what seems very obvious and easy for me is not the same for somebody else. But they probably are doing something that's, there's an area where they excel where for me would be extremely difficult. I think the same thing is true in terms of what speaks to us in Torah. Torah is very vast. It's amazing how many, when I first meet a university student who's had almost no exposure to Jewish learning, I can't ask them, what do you want to learn? Because they don't even know what that means. What is Jewish learning? It's does that mean we're going to read the Bible? That's basically it. Baruch Hashem, when you get here, you realize, wow, there's Chumash, and there's Gemara, and there's Halacha, and there's Musar and Midos work and working on yourself, and there's Kabbalah, there's so many different areas of Torah that a person can connect to. And sometimes you don't always connect to everything. So I'm very aware that I have my style, and I know what I like, and I know what I enjoy, and what I teach is what I enjoy. And for some people it may not do it for you, and other people it may do it for you, but I would say to you that if there's certain things in yeshiva that don't speak to you, don't drop out, because it's really important for you to start with the kind of the liberal arts broad core curriculum, if you will. But know that as you advance in your Jewish learning and your Jewish journey, just like with everything, you get to choose eventually what you want to specialize in, and what are the things that speak to you, and what are, when you're one day, Be'ezras Hashem, you're busy with a family and a job and all those great things that you're going to get to do, and you're going to have your 1-2 hours of learning a day, or however it is. If you're lucky, you'll get a few hours a day to learn, right? You'll get to decide what you pick in those few hours a day. So don't despair if there's certain parts of your yeshiva day that you just don't quite connect to. Now, that being said, I will also say that people change over time. And I did tell a couple of you that it took me almost 5 years before I really loved learning Gemara. Almost 5 years. So other people it took less time, but for me, once it clicked for me, I'm like, I got it. And now I have my 1 hour chavrusa a day. We learn Gemara in depth, very deeply. That's what I want to learn in that hour. So, okay, All right. There's so much to do. Let's go. We're in chapter 2. We spoke yesterday. We began with a discussion about the relationship between men and women. And we said it's not good being that man is alone. And it's not good for the world, and it's not good for man. And the reason why is because we said that a human being is potentially divine, which comes with its benefits and its downsides. The benefit being that we have no idea the potential that we could possibly have. The downside is, however, that we might think that we're complete on our own. We might actually think that we're like God. And so God says, it's it would be preferable. It will be the ultimate lesson in humility and recognizing our own incompleteness. If God says, I need you to learn how to look outward, to look to someone else to help you complete yourself. And that's the beginning of the duality of man and woman. Is that I have to know at the deepest level. There's a teaching in the Gemara that says that a person until they're married is not even called a person yet. You're not a person yet until you're married. Because you're not whole. You're not a whole Adam. Remember, I told you the deep idea a bit earlier that says that God created a human originally as an androgynous being, as a male and female together. And then he splits them down the middle. As we'll learn soon, that everybody learns that when it says God took a rib out of Adam, the word sela can mean a rib, but almost all the commentaries say it's a side. It means a side, which means that he cut Adam in half. Adam was a male and a female. Cut Adam in half, and now they're two. Now you're half of a whole. So the beginning of understanding a relationship is the recognition that we on our own are not complete. Now let's add to that with the next Rashi. So we are in chapter 2. We're in chapter 2, and we're in verse 18. Chapter 2, verse 18. And Hashem Elohim said, it's not good being man alone, man's being alone. I will make for him, and this is a very famous or infamous phrase, a Ezer Kenegdo. Now, how do we translate that in the art scroll? A helper against him. So the first thing is you have to know that that's not a good interpretation. Your wife is not your helper. She's not your assistant. She's not your secretary. If we wanted to say helper, the word in Hebrew would be ozer. That's the conjugation. Azar means to help. And ozer is a helper. And ezer is the thing that the helper does. That is what is the assistance. It's the assistance. So in this particular case, Hashem is the ozer. Hashem's the helper. I'm going to help him. And the way that I'm going to help him is I'm going to give him a woman. I'm going to give him a woman. That's going to be my gift.
I'm confused.
A helper is ozer. Ezer is the thing that the helper does.
Okay.
That is the help.
Okay.
Right? Now don't call your wife the help either, because that's not much better. Right? But what it means is that she's not the helper. God's your helper. She is, when God wants to help you, He gives you your wife. Okay? Now, let's look at this word, Ezer Kenegdo, the help, the assistance, Kenegdo. That would roughly translate it as opposite him or something like that. Now, Keneged can either mean opposite or against. So let's see Rashi. Let's see Rashi. Eli, you want to take us away? The Rashi there, Ezer Kenegdo.
Okay.
18, the second Rashi.
The second Rashi. So there are two authorities. The one was made. Sorry.
A helper opposite.
Against him.
Yeah.
Sorry. If he is fortunate, she is a helper. If he is not fortunate, she is against him.
Okay. All right. So let's take this one together because it's a little bit difficult. Rashi's question. It's not so clear. The commentaries suggest that the word opposite him, the really kenegdo, keneged means opposite. So for example, there's a phrase, mida keneged mida, which is measure for measure. Measure opposite measure, which means in the way that you act, that's the way that the universe acts towards you. That's like the Jewish version of karma. Yeah? So an example of that would be the Egyptians throw all the Jewish children into the river. So they drown the Jews through water. And how does God drown them, kill them? Through water, the Red Sea, right? So it's measure for measure. And the way that you act, that's how the universe acts back towards you. So kenegdo, its typical translation would be opposite. In other words, just like as I was saying, your wife is not below you, she's opposite you. She is the thing that completes you, she is your complement with an E, complement. Yeah? Like two halves of a whole. However, the commentary suggests that that's an extra word, meaning the idea of an azer is something that complements you, especially as we'll see that they're split apart and then they're put back together. And so the commentary suggests that Rashi's question really is, this is an extra word. It really could have just said, I'll make him an azer. I'll make him an azer. It's not good for him to be alone, so I'll make him an azer, which is that assistance. Okay? That's how the commentaries explain it. Doesn't fully satisfy me. I would love to do a bit more digging, but I haven't yet found somebody who really says clearly what Rashi's technical question is. But based on that question, we can understand the answer. So Rashi's question is, what's the word kenegdo doing? I'll tell you what the answer is, that there's two ways, that you can understand the word opposite him in a different way. It's meant to be understood not on the surface level, which is not, I already know she's opposite him, so it must mean something else. What it really means is she could be against him. Because sometimes the word neged means against. In the 1700s, there was the Hasidic movement, the beginning of the Hasidic movement with the Baal Shem Tov, and there were a lot of people who were opposed to the Hasidic movement for various reasons. Do you know what they're called? Misnagdim. Misnagdim. Now I know who went to Chabad. Misnagdim. Mitnaged, the word neged, means the ones against. The ones against. That's what Hasidim call them. They didn't call themselves Misnagdim. What are you, a Misnagdim? I'm an against guy. No, the Hasidim said, well, there's us and then there's the people who are against us. So neged can mean against. So Rashi says, the deeper way to read this, and based on a medrash, the deeper way to read this is, if you do it correctly, if you have the correct relationship, azer, she's your complement, she's your assistance, she helps you in everything that you do. If you're not doing it correctly, kenegdo. If you're not doing it correctly, kenegdo. That's how Rashi reads it. Yes, Ben?
So it says here that it's two halves of one whole, but at this point, or in older Judaism, couldn't you have multiple wives?
Ooh. Yeah, I don't want to get into that. It's a great question.
It's a great question.
The on one foot answer, and this needs a lot of double clicking and unpacking, is that from a spiritual and biological perspective, the man represents outward expansion, infinite potential. The female represents constriction, nurturing, and limitation and discipline, right? But because a man has so much infinite potential, there's a lot of parts of himself that can be completed. And therefore, it's possible for him to express himself with more than one wife. However, with a woman who her whole aspect is nurturing, discipline, taking one thing and developing it, you can't do that with more than one sperm at a time. You can't do that with more than one husband at a time. However, you will notice that although it's possible and it's permissible in Jewish law, the subtext of the entire Torah is, every time you do this, it will go wrong.
Really?
Yes. Every polygamous relationship in the Torah turns out pretty badly. It's rife with strife.
All right, I'll stop.
Okay. Good. Okay. So you'll see further.
So you could just say like happy wife, happy life. Like,
yeah, trust me.
That's what Rashi's saying.
One woman is enough. So let's see. Now let's see what he's saying. What's the step 3 here? What's the step 3? Does anyone have a good step 3 for this Rashi? Step 1. What does kenegdo, what does opposite him mean? What is it doing there? Step 2. The answer is azer. She could be your azer, or alternatively, she could be opposite you, against you. Yeah, Nate.
Does it have to mean that that's like alternatively? Because the way it reads is like as if it's not necessarily a bad thing that she's against.
Right, exactly. Very good. In other words, Rashi's interpretation seems to go against the simple meaning of the verse. The simple meaning of the verse is she's there to compliment you. So how could it be that the same verse that suggests that she's let's just use the word azer instead of helper or helpmeet or help, right? She's an azer there to compliment you, but the subtext is exactly the opposite, right? The deeper answer is 180% the opposite of the simple understanding of the verse. That would be a good step 3. How can you resolve those two? Because the simple understanding is these two words go together. And now Rashi says, no, let's actually break them apart and say one is one thing and the other is totally against it. Yeah.
When they're saying against it, they mean like she's leaning against him and he's leaning against
well,
her? Or
let's
like waging war?
against each other. Neged you. Like a chassid and a misnagid. Okay. So there's something so beautiful and important about this Rashi. And the question, Nate's question, is the answer. The question is, how could it be that the thing that suggests helping you is exactly the opposite and is against you? And the answer is, that's how every relationship works. Men and women are not the same. We're not the same. We are equal. Kenegdo. She is your opposite. She is your complement. We are equal in stature, but she is not the same as you. She's not the same as you. Men and women are different. And you can call that controversial in the 21st century, but we here in the Torah world very unashamedly say that men and women are different. We fulfill different functions. It's entirely possible to have a man who's very feminine and a woman who's very masculine. You know, my wife does all of our finances, and I care much more about which paintings go on the walls than she does. But so it's not like everyone's set in the man goes out and chops down wood all day, and the woman sits at home and weaves baskets. That's not necessarily true, although that could also be a functioning relationship. But in almost every situation, a male-female dynamic is they complement each other, which means they bring different things to the table. If you recognize that you need her, and she recognizes that she needs you in order to complete each other, then you will look at her differences and appreciate those differences and allow her to draw out the best in you and vice versa. However, if things go wrong and you don't recognize that you actually need something outside of you to complete you, and that it's worthwhile having somebody with a different perspective and a different set of skills and weaknesses, and instead all you think about is how she's not living up to whatever expectations you have of her, then the very thing that could have been the saving grace of your relationship, the very part of her that's there to bring out some part of you that's underdeveloped, that's the thing that will be the thorn in your side for the rest of your life. Do you get what I'm saying? I'll make it much more clear. In every relationship, if you think about the thing you love most about your wife, that will be the flip side of the thing that bothers you most about your wife.
Wait, what?
So I'll give you an example, right? So I love the fact that my wife is a lot more, she's a lot more, let's say, managerial than I am. Right, so she's a lot more linear in terms of how she thinks, and okay, this is what's going with our finances. This is what's going with the kids' schoolwork. This is what's going on with all the things that we need to do to fix up the house, right? And she's got this whole list in her head, and this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to save. This is what we're going to do, right? And I'm like, yeah, but let's stop and relax and have a coffee together. So the thing I love most about her is the fact that she really has this incredible talent for being able to see the big picture, to make sure everything's running well and everything's going smoothly. The downside of that is sometimes I wish she would just bloody stop and have a coffee with me. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So in every situation, you will see your wife's greatest strength will be reflected in what you see as her biggest weakness.
Oh, wow. I get it.
So if this is true, this is going to be true in everything. This is going to be true in everything. Oh, I love the fact that my wife is so emotionally available, and usually, and I'm a bit more reserved and maybe too much my head in the clouds, and she's very present and can connect with me on an emotional level. But darn it, she just gets so emotional sometimes. Well, that's the same thing. You can't have one without the other. So that's the idea, is that if you learn to appreciate the difference, then she's an Azer. You realize, oh, I'm married to a woman who's there to bring out the emotional side of me, right? But if you see it just as an inconvenience and like, darn it, just be rational for once in your life, well, then she's Kenegdo. It's the same thing. And that's why Rashi says the verse that implies that she's there to compliment you and help you, the same words can be read in the total opposite way. She's there to be against you. Because it's the same thing. There's an incredible story that I read in a very beautiful book about Shalom Bayis, which is kind of the study of how to have a successful relationship and have a successful marriage. And he told a story once where this particular author, he was a well-known rabbi, and he had a relationship with one of the great rabbis of the previous generation, Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Anyone ever heard of? Rav Chaim Kanievsky's father, Rabbi Yaakov Kanievsky. Has anyone heard of Rav Chaim Kanievsky? Rav Chaim in Bnei Brak, he died a few years ago. He was this person that just learned Torah literally all day. You'd go to his house, tiny little hut. So amazing that the leaders of the Jewish people live like paupers. They have nothing. They have nothing. There was one of these rabbis who literally, he had one chair. So if a guest came into his house, he sat on his bed and gave the guest his chair. Like, these people are not in it for the money. These people are not in it for the money. So you'd go to Rav Chaim and he'd just be sitting there learning, and you'd ask his question. He'd pause, put his finger where he was, answer you, and then go straight back to learn. Like, it was unbelievable. His father, humongous rabbi, Rav Yaakov Kanievsky, lived in Bnei Brak. And one time, this author used to, he was known in many circles as somebody who you'd go to when you had issues with your spouse, when you had relationship issues. And this young, fiery Kollel guy who was learning in yeshiva said, Rabbi, I need to get divorced. I need to get divorced. And he said, okay, so what's the problem? He said, Rabbi, I value truth above all else. I'm a man of integrity, and my wife, she exaggerates to no end, and it's lying, Rabbi. She's lying. She bends the truth. She tells these stories that are way over exaggerated. It kills me to my core that I can live with such a woman who's so loose with the mitzvah of distancing yourself from a false matter. So the rabbi says, okay, let's go to the stipler. Let's go to Rav Yaakov Kanievsky, and let's ask him. Let's ask him for advice. So Rabbi Yaakov Kanievsky was a giant of a human being, and he had, sometimes in a scary way, a particular insight into people. Sometimes you find that with these great figures. So they went to him, and before the young guy opened his mouth, Rabbi Kanievsky said, tell me something. There's an area that you've perfected in your life. Am I right? And the young guy was trying to be humble. He says, perfected, I'm just a young guy. And he says, no, but there's a particular midah, there's a particular attribute that you've really worked on, really. And he says, well, I consider myself to be deeply committed to the truth. Deeply. And he says, yes. He says, let me tell you a story about you. Well, more like about your neshama, your soul. Before your neshama came into the world, Hashem wanted to hold it back. He said, this neshama is so emestic, so committed to truth. If he comes into a world of falsehood, a world where the truth is not always so easy to come by, he's going to destroy the world. He will take his truth laser eyes and look at everything that's not 100% real, and he will burn it all to the ground. it's not worth having him in the world. Unless there's another soul who's willing to accompany him on his journey, who will help him to soften him around the edges, to help him to lessen that fire just enough that he can live in the world. And he said there was one soul that volunteered to do it. And he looked at this young man, he said, that soul is your wife. He said, be grateful that you found her, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. Wow. That's a very powerful story, because that's exactly the point that we're trying to point out here, is what we find sometimes to be the most grating on us is usually exactly the thing that we need to learn how to fix. Yeah, Brandon.
But what's like, okay, in that example, that's a great story. But in that example, like, if he's a truthful guy, like, why would you want to, like, lower such a great mitzvah of distancing yourself from falsehood?
Because there's a Gemara that says that there's one situation where you're allowed to bend the truth. Do you know where that is? You know what it is?
Yeah, no, I've heard someone.
Okay, so
Aaron, what is it?
What it is?
To what?
Is it to like not hurt someone's feelings?
Shalom. For the sake of shalom.
It's like a
Right.
It's like a tractate.
You're at a wedding, and the groom comes up to you and says, "What do you think of the bride, huh?" And she's like dog ugly, and hard of hearing, and whatever. Okay, not the sharpest tack in the whatever. How does that? Not the sharpest tool in the shed. And what do you say?
Beautiful.
She says, "Amazing. What a catch, right? Incredible. What a girl, right?" And that's what Beis Hillel says, the house of Hillel. Beis Shammai, the house of
But
Hillel.
those are white lies.
And so the question is it a lie? Is it not a lie?
It's a Greek Gemara.
The point is, the Gemara says, for the sake of shalom, you can bend the truth. Because we don't live in a world of 100% truth. And things that live in that world of it's all or nothing, it's black or white, it's true or it's false, and nothing in between, those people end up doing a lot of damage in the world.
Why? That doesn't make sense.
Because you need to live with the reality. In other words, just like we said at the beginning, the world can't live with strict justice. It cannot exist with perfection. We don't live in a world of perfection. So when you throw your expectations of perfection at the world and it doesn't live up to that, and you say, well, that's it, I'm done with you, you're nothing to me. That's not living with the reality. We need to also have a little bit of rachamim, a little bit of compassion, and say, okay, I have a vision for the future that I would always like to strive for perfection, but we don't live in perfection right now.
And it's a tough pill to swallow to say we live in a world that's false.
That's false? Look around, buddy. I mean, I hope I'm not the first person to tell you that, like, we live in a world that values falsehood. And we live in a world of superficiality.
That doesn't mean we should too.
No, but it means that we have to allow for its existence. You can't take somebody who's at the beginning of their journey and look at you guys and say, I want everyone tomorrow to show up to Shacharis in a suit and tie, because how dare you? Doesn't it say in the Shulchan Aruch that you should show up to davening as if you're standing in front of the king? What's wrong with you? Miles, stop wearing shorts. If I do that to Miles, he's going to crumble. He's going to just shrivel up and die.
Is he wearing shorts?
But do you understand? Do you understand? I'm not telling you, Miles, to stop wearing shorts. I'm telling you that one day, when you're ready and when you feel like, when you feel like it's coming internally motivated, that you're like, you know what? I really feel like, from now on I'm going to start wearing trousers to davening. Old habits die hard. I'm still British, still got some British in me. Then you'll do it. But right now, you're on a journey. And it's not all about taking on everything at once. And if you do that, it will be drastic.
For wearing pants.
There's a halacha to dress as if you were going to stand in front of royalty at davening.
Really?
Yeah.
No flip flops.
Guys,
But if you're really coming
in the
back
right
from, like, a
time,
slash,
in the
like,
right time, in the right time. Don't all of a sudden start wearing. I'm telling you, if you all come to class tomorrow looking like this, I will tell you all off. Okay, it's not the right way to do it. Yeah, Samuel.
Some pursuit of truth.
we're allowed to bend, in pursuit of peace, we're allowed to bend the truth.
Yeah.
That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
Is this why we see so much corruption among politicians?
No, because they're not doing it for the sake of peace. They're doing it for their own interests. If you're truly doing it purely because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, then you can bend, say things that might have a double meaning. Right?
Not always.
No.
Because in the
No.
Torah, there's the one case if you travel to a place for business meeting where you're invited to a wedding, and like you show up to the wedding and the person says, "Well, I was thinking you traveled all this way."
Oh yeah, that's Genevas Das. Yeah, absolutely.
Then
No,
you-
you have to be upfront when it comes to yourself, meaning you don't want to mislead people.
Okay.
But that's again for your own interests. That's because you want people to think that you really cared about them when you didn't care as much about them. The goal is it has to be in somebody else's interest. Okay, there's so much to say, but we got to move on, okay? All right, oh God. Okay, fine. So, that's good marriage advice. Keep that in your pockets for when it's the right time. So, now, this is what he says. He says, I'm going to make him a helper against him, opposite him. Then he does something interesting. Hashem then forms from the ground all of the animals of the field and all the birds of the sky. And he brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever he called them, that's what their name would be. It's a very strange thing that happens here. Now, very, very briefly, what's happening here is God's doing a couple of things. Number one, God is showing Adam that he's capable of tremendous wisdom. Because when you call an animal by its name, and that's what its name really is, it means that you can see to the essence of that being. As we said before, the Hebrew language is not accidental. Whatever the word is for an animal or a thing, that reflects its truest essence. And so Adam is exercising his ability to comprehend what is the function of everything on this earth. What are the... one second, Samuel. But what you're going to see in the next verse is, and the man called them all names, right? But the man did not find an Ezer Kenegdo. He didn't find any helper. So what God is doing is he's giving him a little bit of experiential learning. And he's saying, I'm going to show you that it's not possible to have that deep, deep relationship with anyone or anything else. No other animal or living organism is going to be able to fulfill you on that level. No matter how much somebody says that all you need is a dog or a cat to complete you, it's not true. It's not true. And this is what's going to help him appreciate the fact that these things do not complete him, and he has to search elsewhere for true completion. Then, once he realizes this, Hashem then places upon him a deep sleep. And he slept. And while he's sleeping, sleep, by the way, is the ultimate act of submission. Right? It's the recognition that we are, in a very real way, we come to grips with our mortality every day when we go to sleep. The Talmud says that sleep is 1/60th of death. We can't move. We can't do anything. We're powerless. We're helpless. We're like helpless beings when we sleep. So there's this recognition of our mortality, and through that recognition, that's where is born the thing that completes us. The part of us where we look outside of ourselves and we say, okay, I'm not whole. And it says, and he took one of his sides and he closed up the flesh underneath it. And Hashem built that side that he took from the man into a woman, and he brought her to man. And the man said, this time, as opposed to all the other times when he sees all the other animals, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Right? She was part of me before. We're not like two separate entities that are now meeting each other for the first time. We were once whole, we were split apart, and now we're finding each other again. For this, she will be called Isha, because she was taken from Ish. The words sound like they come from the same thing. And as we explained before, Ish is with a Yud, Isha is with a Hey, and that's going to come back to the whole question of how we relate to the opposite sex and what that relationship is meant to be, the Yud and the Hey completing each other. All right. Therefore, Al Cain, a man will leave his father and his mother, and he will cling to his wife, Don't think also that you can somehow just be complete by your own flesh and blood relationships. You can't just stay home your whole life and think that, well, if I stick with my parents, then I'll also be a fully developed, mature human being. No, you've got to go out, leave the people that you came from, and develop yourself into something even more. And they will become one flesh. And now it says, both of them were arumim, naked. The man and his wife, v'lo yisbo shashu. They were not ashamed. Both of them were naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. So let's stop here and read this Rashi, because this is going to set up the whole next part of the story where we introduce the snake and the whole concept of evil, and we talk about what it means to be a human being on a very deep level. Yes, Samuel.
I thought the man was created after the man once, but it says here that...
Yeah, that's right. So
from the ground.
again, we're switching the whole order here. In chapter 1, it's linear. This was created, this was created, this was created. But as we said at the beginning of chapter 2, there was no, right, the grass was not yet even grown. The shrubs weren't even grown. In other words, God created everything in potential, but everything's potential becomes actualized only when man comes along. So you're right. They are there and they're not there. It's both. From a historical narrative point of view, of course they were created first. But from a teleological purpose-driven point of view, it's teleological means, telos means purpose or goal. So from a goal-oriented point of view, in terms of what everything is for, all of history doesn't matter until human beings come on the scene. It's like they're not there.
Dinosaurs didn't matter.
Only in as far as they can teach us about us and where we come from and what the world is like. There's a lot we can learn from dinosaurs.
Very
but-
alienistic.
What?
Very like...
It's very, and what would the word be? Androcentric? Human-centric. Yeah, that's okay. You know, we don't have to apologize for the fact that we are head and shoulders the most advanced organism on this planet. It's without a question. Why do we have to be self-hating humans?
Ever seen the movie Prometheus?
No. Yes.
So Rabbi Jacob says something similar about this. He said Adam got to know every single animal before Eve came along.
Yeah.
So that means he had intercourse with every single animal.
Right. So again, these are not understood on a simple level. What does it mean? We didn't engage. Whatever. I hope no images are in your mind right now. But whatever you're thinking, right? It means he had an intimate relationship with all of these animals in order to understand their deep and fundamental nature.
Yeah.
And he found that none of them could complete him.
But then Eve came along, and then after he got to know her, then he decided, like, I'm full now. So then why
Okay.
do we...
We'll get there. We're going to read the whole Garden of Eden story.
Oh, we didn't pass that yet?
We didn't pass that yet. Did you see it yet? We didn't see it yet. We're going in order. Okay. So, below Yisbo Shashu, they were not ashamed. Please take this Rashi. There's only one Rashi on verse 25. Please read the Rashi with your friend and neighbor, and I'll see you back in a few minutes. Steps 1 through 3. Let's do it. Okay, who's got step 1 for me? Okay, Roy?
Why weren't they ashamed of any?
Why weren't they ashamed? So I think we're 50% of the way there. I think I think we can refine that question. We got to make it a little bit more okay, why weren't they ashamed? But there should be something that's conflicting. That they should, meaning that there should be something that should suggest that they are ashamed. Yeah, Ephraim.
Why do they even need to mention the piece around them?
Okay, so that's interesting. Is they weren't ashamed? Could be that could be one of the answers. Is why do we need to know this? Why do we need to know this? It might be extra, but okay, maybe it's important for us to see, especially because, as we'll see as the story develops, after the sin, they run to go put clothing on. So maybe it is important. Yeah.
It says they were both naked before the man and his wife, implying that maybe they were naked before they became man and wife.
Interesting. So that it's a very interesting question.
It could have said
you know,
man and his wife
Right.
both
Okay.
naked.
So this is the beauty of Torah: is that one day, as you're reading this parsha again, you're going to ask the question that Cole just asked. Wait a minute. If I were an editor of a book, which words would I cross out? And they were both naked. Well, who's both? Well, we were just speaking about man and woman. There isn't anyone else in the world that we could be talking about. So why would you refer to them as the man and his wife? Again, I knew that already. Just take it out. I know what both of them is referring to. So that's a very good question. But one of the ways that we know that that's not Rashi's question is because Rashi always quotes the part of the verse that he's speaking about. So at the very beginning, you'll see in bold, it says, and they were not ashamed. So those are the words that Rashi takes issue with. So it has to be that there's something wrong with those words. Aaron?
I guess, how could it be that they have this knowledge to name animals and do all these other things, but they can't realize their nakedness?
Great. So Rashi told us what the question is. Afal pi, even though. Even though is a question. Even though is a question. It means, wait a minute, didn't man possess such incredible wisdom that he was capable of peering into the true essence of every animal in existence, and he didn't realize he's naked? How can that be? So that would be the fleshed out formulation of Roy's question. How could it be that they weren't embarrassed, that they just didn't realize that this is just not the way to walk around? Yeah, Samuel.
Why is it bad to be naked?
Okay, that's step 3. Why is it bad to be naked? Are you giving me an answer?
No.
Joey's like, maybe it is bad to be
I'm not
naked.
giving an answer to that.
Oh, you have another step 3 question, or what's up?
How do we even know that they weren't aware that they were naked?
Well, it says v'lo yisbo shashu, right? They weren't ashamed. So it could be they had some awareness that they were naked, but what it sounds more like is they had no awareness that nakedness was a problem. And of course, we will see if you read a little bit further, once they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it says their eyes were open and they saw that they were naked. So it seems like all of a sudden they became aware of their nakedness.
Well, if you answer that before reading on, you'd say, why would they be ashamed then? Because it describes Adam and Eve as they shall become one flesh, so there's no reason to be ashamed of one another, and they were so close to Hashem.
Okay, so I think we can, let's say, throw Ephraim's question into the mix, and that would help our understanding, which is, why does it need to say they weren't ashamed? Why does it need to say they weren't ashamed? And the answer is because you would think that they would be ashamed. So it's important to mention. We, as readers of the story, remember, this text is not written for Adam and Eve. This text is written for the Jewish people. Moshe is bringing this stuff down from Mount Sinai and teaching us, the Jewish people, who live in a time and place when everyone wears clothing. Okay. Rashi's answer is, well, they didn't know the matters of modesty, the ways of modesty, tznius, in order to distinguish between good and evil. This is packed. And even though that he had been given wisdom to be able to call the animals by their name, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, had not entered them. They had not been given to them until they ate from the tree. And then the Yetzer Hara entered into them, and then he knew the difference between good and evil. Step 3.
What was step 2?
Step 2, I was just reading the Rashi. Step 1 is, why is it that they wouldn't be ashamed? How could they not know that one should be clothed, even though they had incredible amount of wisdom to be able to discern what the names of the animals were? Nonetheless, they lacked the basic fundamental understanding of that we clothe ourselves as human beings. And the answer is there's something called the wisdom that they had to name the animals, but there's something else called the knowledge of good and evil, which is what enlightens us to whether or not we should wear clothing. And that the reason why we didn't know, Adam and Eve didn't know to wear clothing, that they didn't know to be ashamed, is because the evil inclination through eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is what gave them the knowledge of good and evil. And only then did they know that they should be clothed.
Again, why is it evil to be clothed?
Okay, that's question number one. Why is it evil to be clothed? Great, good step 3 question. Why is it evil? Anything else? Yeah.
Rabbi, what was the step 1 again? What was the question?
Step 1 is, how could it be that they didn't have this knowledge if we see elsewhere that they possessed incredible amounts of knowledge? How could they not have the knowledge to be ashamed of their nakedness? Yeah, Ben.
How can they only get the knowledge of knowing what good and evil is after eating the apple if before that they knew that eating the apple was bad?
Wow.
I love you, Ben. Okay, that's Maimonides' question. The Rambam asked that question in the Guide to the Perplexed, which is his big philosophy book. It's one of the most beautiful questions. What is good and evil? What is the knowledge of good and evil? If it's the knowledge of morality, then how could you command someone not to do something before they possess the knowledge of morality? You can't command an animal to follow a precept, right? You can classically condition them, but that's not the same thing as expecting someone to do the right thing. How could, on the one hand, Adam and Eve be expected to do the right thing if they didn't have the knowledge of right and wrong? That's a mind-blowing step 3 question. And it gets into the question of Samuel's question, which is, why is being naked evil? Why is it bad? And then another step 3 question is, who mentioned the Yetzer Hara? Who spoke about the Yetzer Hara here, such that Rashi has to introduce that? So let's unpack. Let's unpack. Maimonides answers your question, Ben, with a very beautiful answer. He says, we have to understand what the knowledge of good and evil actually is. It is not the knowledge of morality. Because if that were true, he said, then by disobeying God, we'd actually be gaining something very, very valuable. By not listening to God and eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we'd become moral beings. Whereas previously we were amoral beings. There's no way you could imagine that by committing such a grave transgression, that somehow you would incorporate such elevated wisdom. So rather, the tree of knowledge of good and evil cannot mean morality. And furthermore, he said, Adam was created in the image of God. How could you say that they weren't created with this infinite sense of right and wrong? Rather, the tree of knowledge of good and evil does not give you the knowledge of morality. He says good and evil, Tov and Ra, is to be understood in contrast to something called true and false. So what I mean is like this. Remember when we spoke about the difference between humans versus angels versus animals? So in the beginning, at this stage of humanity, humans resembled a lot more like angels than they did like animals, which means that they had virtually no instinctual drive. They had incredible clarity of knowledge of what the world was meant to be. So what that means is they looked at morality in the sense of true and false. We do not murder because that's false. It represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the connectedness of reality. It's not something that one would ever do. In the words of Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who was a student of the Vilna Gaon in the 18th century, said, it's like Adam wouldn't sin like you wouldn't put your hand in a flame. It's just not real. It's just false. You wouldn't do it. It does not align with reality. That's how they saw morality. It was so clear to them. Yeah.
So what about like Cain, who's committed the first?
Well, Cain's after the sin.
Oh, so this is
Hold on.
this is-
Everything's going to change. Okay. What is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Knowledge of good and evil is not right and wrong in an objective sense. It's right and wrong in a subjective sense. In the language of Maimonides, it's like what's pleasant and unpleasant. It's what's interesting and boring. It's what's nice and not nice. That's the knowledge of good and evil. So
subject versus
subjective versus objective. Subjective means I can have a personal opinion about it. Is it good for me? Good to me? Okay? So let me give you a couple of examples here, okay? You're driving along and you're reverse parking, and all of a sudden you're a little bit too close to the car in front of you, and you dent their rear bumper. Okay? Oh man, I could just drive away. No one has to know. Now that is the voice of the knowledge of good and evil. True and false would mean, well, I caused somebody a monetary loss. I must pay for monetary loss. Whatever you take out of the system, you have to put back in. That's the way the world works. You can't hide from that. But once I have a subjective understanding of like, oh man, this is going to really set me back. I've been saving up to do all these big mitzvahs and plan a wedding or whatever it is that I'm trying to do, and how am I going to do all those mitzvahs with that if I now have to pay $300 to pay for somebody's bumper? Like, it's clearly got to be, it's probably a mitzvah for me not to pay because I'm doing all these other mitzvahs. That is pleasant and unpleasant. Almost every moral conundrum that we find ourselves in is a result of what's subjectively nice or not nice to us. I like to think of it as this nice acronym, DIANE. Different, interesting, attractive, new, and exciting. These are the languages of the knowledge of good and evil, right? It might not be good, but it is interesting. There was this crazy campaign. I saw this, I stopped for 10 minutes. I was walking through the airport, and Diesel Jeans, about 10 years ago, ran this campaign, and the tagline was "Be stupid." It was "Be stupid," and it had all these images of somebody jumping out of a window or stuff like, and the copy, the words would be like, "Smart has the brains, stupid has the stories." In other words, it's interesting to be dumb, to do dumb things. And I thought that is the most perfect encapsulation of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Because all of a sudden we're concerned with what feels good, what sounds nice, what's different or exciting or attractive, right? You're hanging out with a bunch of your friends, and somebody says something that it's almost like asking for you to just dunk on them, right? They said something so stupid, and you could so easily make everybody in the room laugh at their expense. Now, on the one hand, if you were thinking about it through a purely objective lens, it would be like, why would I ever embarrass somebody in public? I'm sorry if I feel like I'm calling somebody out here, but
Just call it out 10 people.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's fine. We've all been there. We've all been there. But on the other hand, you're like, yeah, but it would be so funny. It would be so funny. That's the knowledge of good and evil. That's pleasant and unpleasant. That's DIANE. Different, interesting, attractive, new, and exciting. This is where we have our greatest battles with the inner voice that says, yeah, but. Rabbi Soloveitchik, who I spoke about yesterday, he says, imagine you're walking down the street and all of a sudden you see a burning building, there's a child in a window, and you could easily climb up the fire escape, and you climb up and you cover him up and you grab him and you save him, and you're like, oh, thank you, you're amazing, you feel great. And then you walk down 3 more blocks and you see another burning building, and you're like, oh my God, a second burning building. You climb up the stairs, there's another little child in the window, you grab him, you save him. Now at this point your clothes are a little bit tattered and burned through, but you're like, okay, it's fine, I did the right thing. By the third burning building, you're like, what's going on here? There's obviously, people just setting fire to buildings all day. But at that point, would you say to yourself, boring, I did this already? No, because the act of saving a child from a burning building, it's so clear that it's right, that it's good, that it's moral, that the question of whether it's interesting to you doesn't even come in, doesn't even factor in. And yet, if I'm ever been in this situation, ever written thank you notes for all the gifts you got for your bar mitzvah or something like that? You know, by the 7th thank you note, you're like, come on, do I really have to keep doing this? This is insane. Why don't I just copy paste and I'll just, sign my name at the bottom? And your parents are like, no. You got to write a thing. They took the effort to give you a present, to come to your bar mitzvah. You write them a handwritten thank you note. You know it's the right thing to do. You know that's